Welcome to this explainer. I am so thrilled you're tuning in today because we are going to unpack one of the most complex, deeply rooted aspects of Indian society. We hear about it in the news constantly, we read about it in our history books, and hey, for those of you gearing up for competitive exams, this is absolutely central to your syllabus. We're going to deconstruct the massive historical shift from deep-seated social inequality to the ongoing pursuit of true, substantive social justice. Let's just jump right in.
To make sense of all this, we're going to follow a clear diagnosis-to-cure roadmap. Here's our agenda. 1. Caste versus casteism. 2. Causes and societal impacts. 3. The constitutional shield. 4. Key laws and reservations. 5. Modern changes and Sanskritisation. And finally, 6. The path to social justice.
All right, starting with Section 1, Caste versus Casteism. We really need to isolate the historical fact from the active attitude.
Okay, so what's the actual difference here? Think of caste, historically known as kulam, as a foundational structure. It's a historical institution, a birth-based grouping tied to traditional occupations. It's essentially just an identity. But then you have casteism, and this is where it gets toxic. Casteism isn't a structure, it's an attitude. It's an active behavior, where a group elevates its own narrow interests above the wider interests of society, which naturally breeds prejudice and hostility. So to put it simply, caste is the identity, casteism is the toxicity.
So how exactly does that toxicity form? Well, it follows a pretty simple, almost inevitable formula. You start at step 1 with a basic caste identity. But then in step 2, that identity gets weaponized into a narrow group interest. And finally, in step 3, when those group interests inevitably clash with others, the whole thing devolves into active prejudice and discrimination. That 3-step chain reaction, that is the very definition of casteism.
If we zoom out and look at this chronologically, it's actually pretty fascinating. In the traditional era, we had this incredibly strict caste-based social structure. Then the colonial period rolls around, and they essentially rigify these groups through heavy administration and classification. But then, from 1950 onwards, our constitutional democracy steps in and starts dismantling the legal backing of that entire system. Fast forward to the present day, and modernization is driving huge social shifts. But, and this is a really important but, while the system itself is modernized, the underlying identity hasn't completely vanished.
Moving on to Section 2, Causes and Societal Impacts. Let's look at what's fueling this today and the domino effect it has on society.
The root causes today are this messy mix of the old and the new. Historically, sure, we have deep-seated hierarchies and customs keeping boundaries firm, especially endogamy or the lack of intercaste marriage. But what is keeping the fire burning right now? It's modern forces. It's fierce economic competition for jobs and land. It's political vote bank mobilization. Economic friction and electoral strategies are literally breathing new life into ancient divisions.
And that brings us to the devastating domino effect of these divisions. It's a chain reaction. Prejudice leads directly to discrimination, which then manifests as severe social exclusion and poverty. When you have unequal access to basic resources, it sparks intense political polarization. Ultimately, if you leave these localized divisions unchecked, they bubble up and threaten the very cohesion and integration of the entire nation.
Let's pivot to Section 3, the constitutional shield. This is essentially our treatment plan for these historical inequalities.
The framers of the Constitution were incredibly logical in how they aimed to dismantle inequality. And hey, if you are an APPSC aspirant, perk up, because this is incredibly high yield for your exams. Here's the foundation. Article 14 establishes equality before the law. Article 15 explicitly forbids discrimination. Article 16 guarantees equal opportunity in public employment. Article 17 outright abolishes untouchability, and finally, Article 46 mandates the state to actively promote the educational and economic interests of marginalized groups.
But you know, the Constitution doesn't just hand out promises and walk away, it builds actual structural mechanisms to enforce them. Articles 330 and 332 guarantee reserved seats in the Lok Sabha and state assemblies, meaning political voices actually get heard. Articles 338 and 338A create national commissions to actively oversee and protect these groups. And Articles 341 and 342 set up the whole framework for specifically identifying scheduled castes and tribes so the right protections go to the right people.
Actually, let's pause right here for a second. I want to give you a quick memory trick to make sure this sticks. 14 is equality, 15 is discrimination, 16 is employment, 17 is untouchability, and 46 is welfare. Repeat that to yourself a few times. If you can lock those 5 pillars in your mind, you understand the entire architectural foundation of Indian social justice.
Next up, Section 4, Key Laws and Reservations. Let's transition from the theory of the Constitution to the hard laws on the ground.
We have 2 massive pieces of legislation that show exactly how legal protection had to escalate over time. First, in 1955, the Protection of Civil Rights Act was passed to specifically penalize the practice of untouchability, basically bringing Article 17 into the real world. But as society evolved, the challenges got more complex, right? We needed a stronger response. So, in 1989, the SC/ST Prevention of Atrocities Act was brought in to forcefully prevent violence and offer severe legal protections for marginalized communities. 1955 and 1989. Contrast those in your notes because they are crucial.
Which brings us to this really profound philosophical truth about reservation policies. Think about it this way. Equality is not just putting everyone on the exact same starting line if one group has been carrying heavy weights for centuries, right? Reservation isn't about treating people unequally, it's an instrument of true substantive social justice. It is deliberately designed to address historical disadvantages so we can finally, actually, achieve genuine representation and equal opportunity.
Section 5, Modern Changes and Sanskritisation.
The ground is shifting underneath these old traditions, and it's happening fast. Why? Because modern currents are just incredibly powerful. Increased education is completely rewriting mindsets. Urbanization means people are flocking to cities where anonymous, skill-based economies are replacing strict village hierarchies. With industrialization, your occupation isn't dictated by your birth anymore. The old rules literally just cannot survive the friction of a modern, fast-paced economy.
And that brings us to an absolute must-know concept for your exams. The famous sociologist M.N. Srinivas coined the term Sanskritisation. So what is it? It's the organic sociological process where a community that is traditionally considered lower in the hierarchy actively adopts the customs, the rituals, and the lifestyle of a traditionally higher status group. Why? To elevate their own social standing. It is a brilliant illustration of how people actively try to push for social mobility, even from within incredibly rigid historic constraints.
Finally, Section 6, Path to Social Justice. Let's talk about the final cure for the diagnosis we established at the start.
How do we actually achieve this? Well, it's a chain reaction, and it literally all kicks off with the most powerful tool we have, education. Step 1, education, sparks Step 2, a rational awareness of our constitutional values. Once you have that awareness, it naturally leads to Step 3, the reduction of prejudice. When the prejudice drops, we unlock Step 4, social integration. And that gets us to our final destination, Step 5, a society genuinely built on equality and human dignity. Education is the absolute catalyst for the whole shebang.
Now, looking at this completely objectively, we do have to acknowledge how caste interacts with our modern democracy today. It is very much a double-edged sword. On the positive side, caste identity has allowed marginalized groups to mobilize politically. It's given them a voice, representation, and helped develop leadership that fights for welfare. But on the flip side, it feeds directly into cynical vote bank politics, which deepens social divisions and drives intense political polarization. We really have to hold both of those truths in our minds to understand the current democratic landscape in India.
Which leaves us with a massive question to end on. We've traced the historical roots, we've seen how it evolved into toxic casteism, and we've explored the immense legal and social efforts to cure it. So, I leave you with this thought. As urbanization goes into overdrive and our policies push harder for substantive equality, will a future built entirely on education and constitutional dignity finally erase the borders of caste once and for all? Or will those borders just evolve into entirely new forms of identity? Keep that in the back of your mind as you continue your studies. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will see you in the next explainer.
Thanks for watching. For daily APPSC Group 2 study material and updates, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon.